Greetings sailors, welcome back to World of Warships and Patreon supporter spotlight number 49. There's going to be a bit of a theme today in that it's a pair of warships games and they're both going to be Royal Navy battleship games. So we've got the tier 4 here, the Orion, as driven by Redman 36, and then after that we're going to have the Iron Duke, the tier 5, being driven by Andy CX. So this one we're going to start off with, and there's going to be a lot of HE. And that's the thing with the Royal Navy battleships, that's why I picked out this pair of replays, is that firing almost exclusively, if not exclusively, HE with almost all of the British battleships is completely viable. And that's a bit of a problem as it stands at the moment. And the reason why, and if you've been living under a rock, it's completely viable, is that it is doubly buffed compared to regular battleship HE in two ways. Well, that was a bit of a, yeah, saying it's doubly buffed in two ways, that makes sense, right? It has better penetration, and it also has, across the majority of the line, better fire chance. Now that's not true across all the line. The Queen Elizabeth has the same fire chance as the Warspite. Hello, fun and engaging mechanics. And the Monarch also has something like 34 or 35% fire chance as well, but they still get the better HE penetration. And with those two ships you do, well, at least with the Queen Elizabeth, I've only really just gotten to unlocking the Monarch myself. But having played other ships through the mid-tiers, the ones I see firing a lot of HE are the lower tier ones. Not so much the Queen Elizabeth, then get to the KGV where, and I will admit myself, I've fired a fair bit of HE, and I never quite had a game where I went full HE, although it would have been entirely viable to do so. But then facing off against Monarchs, which are, you know, there's fewer of them around than, say, Queen Elizabeth's, because obviously people have got to grind through to get to tier 8. But, yeah, because they have the more normal, as it were, HE compared to other battleships, I think you see people switching up the ammo types a lot more, that they are thinking about which ammo to go for, whereas something like the Orion or the KGV, you don't really have to think about it. You can pretty much just stick with the HE and fire that over and over again, and you can get salvos like that. 9k damage doesn't sound like that much, but 9k damage with a very healthy chance of setting one, if not more, fires, compared to an AP salvo with the same number of hits, which might have done a couple of K at that angle. It's just incredibly reliable damage, and you can set fires on top of it, and that's the problem. It's just it's too good in all directions, basically. And then you get up to the tier 10, the Conqueror, with its fantastic heal, and yeah, it is topping the damage charts by for battleships anyway by a fair margin, and I think it's even beating the Hakuryu, which previously was top of the tier 10 damage charts. So overall, generally, there is a balance problem here. There is definitely a balance problem, and I think I've read, my memory's telling me I've read somewhere that the HE shells used in British battleship caliber guns did have a larger bursting charge. Or was it just their normal shells? I can't remember. There was something about a larger bursting charge anyway, so it might have been that it was an actual historical fact that inspired this particular set of characteristics for these ships. But I think it's pretty clear to all that they took it a bit too far. I think if they'd either left it with the better penetration, which would have been an interesting thing in of itself, you know, the ability to do more damage with your HE shells because you're going to get more penetrations, and even just with the same HE fire chance, you know, in line with the rest of the battleships tier per tier, I think it probably would have been fine. I mean, a valid comparison here is the Scharnhorst with the 11-inch guns, where there are a lot of times when you're playing that thing, people are angling, and you just switch to the HE when you're firing against other battleships. But the AP is still entirely valid. But it's not. It doesn't have the reliability of damage that the British battleship HE has, and it certainly doesn't have the fire chance. So it becomes, you know, a more used part of the toolbox, but it isn't the whole picture. I mean, you can go around firing only HE in the Scharnhorst, but I think you'd be wasting the potential of that ship. So, I mean, on the face of it, it's, to my eyes, I mean, I would say either give it the extra fire chance or the better HE penetration, but having both is ridiculous. And even the extra fire chance, I think you could still tone it down a bit. I think you could still knock off a couple of percentage points and have it maybe be just above what the other battleships have. Because at the moment, we've got the ridiculous situation of AP-only cruisers and almost effectively HE-only battleships. And it isn't good for the game, because it doesn't reward skilled play at all. This is one of the huge issues that people had with old-style artillery in World of Tanks, and to some extent that people still have with artillery in World of Tanks, that you can be doing everything right, but there's this mechanic that there's just no counterplay to. And in the case of World of Tanks, well, there kind of was, in that you could just, you know, hide, but hiding isn't really a good way to win games. And having this particular set of mechanics in World of Warships, well, you can see that Redman's already up to 100,000 damage almost. And I think he's pretty much just fired HE. In fact, I think he's exclusively fired HE so far. And that's fine. That's exclusively viable in this thing. And even though there is a carrier in this game, it's not bothering him too much. It hasn't gone for him so far. And actually, I have to say, the Orion is one of those ships where the AA DPS, for its tier, you know, it's buffable to the point where having manual AA would actually be reasonably viable on this thing. You could do an AA spec Orion, and so even if people go, oh, it's an Orion and they're in a carrier and they try and take you out first because they know you're dangerous, you've still got an answer to that potentially. So yeah, it's a problem because it does not reward skilled play. It doesn't really reward skilled counterplay. It's just, you know, load this particular type of ammo and win. And you might make the argument that the same is true of battleships firing AP against other classes of ships, for instance. But there isn't that fire mechanic going on in the background. I think that's why it's such a problem. It's not just the damage you're doing with the HE shells, which is fairly considerable because you've got that extra penetration. It's also that fire chance and the ability to set multiple fires, and the fact that you've got a big enough broadside with most of these ships that you actually have a reasonable chance of setting multiple fires if you're doing it right. Hell, there's enough penetration with these against some of the more thinly armoured cruisers that you can get HE citadels quite easily where other battleship HE wouldn't be able to do it. So it's a problem, and it's a problem because it discourages people from playing. It encourages people to play these things and only spam HE, and it basically skews the game balance in a not good way, because we end up with a situation where player skill is just kind of being disregarded almost, and people don't want to play a game where that's true in the main. I think most people would prefer to play a game where, okay, the enemy's doing this, but you've got a chance to counterplay, where you've got a chance to outthink and outplay the enemy. And with this battleship HE spam, you really can't do that because there's no defense against it apart from not being hit. And you know, the class that has the best chance of that maybe is as destroyers, just because they've got the best chance of being sneaky. But at the higher tiers, especially when there's a good chance, at least on EU, of there being planes and radar in play, well, even then you can't really count on stealth, and so you're almost forcing people back to just doing long-range torpedo spam, which is not a particularly effective tactic these days, because the only higher tier ships that do have particularly long-range torpedoes, the Japanese destroyers, they have horrible detection ranges, so they don't really act as a good counter to these HE spamming British battleships. So over 100,000, in fact approaching 120,000. This game's pretty close, as you can see. I've been basically talking about battleships the entire time, but I've wanted to do a video on it. and I can't quite, like, I know the Conqueror is especially problematic, and I said, in my opinion, in my estimation, when I was doing the preview video, that, you know, the Orion, partly because of the matchmaking, because it's never going to see more than tier 5, and the Conqueror are the particularly problematic ones of the line. But just the line as a whole, the conception of it is definitely an issue. So anyway, the carrier's finally coming for him. I'm not quite sure what captain skills he's got, but between himself and this Myogi, they're actually shooting down some planes here. So obviously there's a bit of RNG involved, but it's been enough to scare that carrier off, attempting with his second squad. So, yeah, there's only a couple of ships left now. It's basically the enemy carrier and this kamikaze. And the kamikaze looks like he might take out the... Yeah, the Iron Duke's taken some in the nose and is flooding. But they have enough numbers now, and they have enough cap circles that they have secured this. But this was a really close game overall. And I don't think Redman once had to reach for the AP. There are times when he could have used the AP, but he didn't have to. And so, why would you? You can absolutely get away with only using HE. I've actually got a KGV game from... I think they were a Patreon at one point, but they had to withdraw their support because, you know, I'm just some dude that makes videos on the internet, and sometimes more important uses for your money come along. But yeah, he sent me in one where it was it's like 220k, something like that, in a KGV, and I can absolutely, like, if I could bear the thought of doing that myself, just going full HE in a King George V, it probably wouldn't be that difficult to get towards 200k, if not over it. And as it is, even without that, with the KGV, just varying the use of ammo, I've been trying to, you know, when I've been grinding through it, I've been trying to intelligently use ammo based on the situation I find myself in. But if I'd just gone full HE, I possibly could have done more damage. I might have actually been holding myself back by this notion of, well, sometimes I have to fire AP, and sometimes it's better to fire AP. But no, you know, if you're absolutely trying to power game it, no, you just fire HE all the time, I suppose. So that was the Orion, which is a bit ridiculous at the moment. The Iron Duke is not too far removed. I mean, it's not that big of an upgrade. Fortunately for Andy here, he's got a top tier game. It is a double carrier game, which might be a problem for him, because the AA is basically the same as at tier 4, but suddenly you can see tier 7 carriers. Yeah, in this case, because he's top tier, it's a much more comfortable situation. But for the Iron Duke, you can maybe see the HE as being more of a crutch, because it suddenly it will get much more unfavourable matchmaking more often than the Orion will, because the last game was a tier 5 game as well. And as you saw there, Redman acquitted himself very, very well. He got a very good result out of that. So this one's going to be a lot more AP usage, and of course it's complete speculation as to whether Andy would get the same result if he was also exclusively firing HE. You just can't know without trying, I suppose. But the AP is still, you know, it's still okay. The AP is a bit less good. I think this is one of the reasons why on some ships, you know, the KGV particularly, people are reaching for the HE, not just because the HE is so good, but the AP isn't necessarily as good because of the short fuse times, which in theory means you'll do better against cruisers, but it's still entirely possible to get overpens. Now the carriers, one of the carriers has made a drop, and that looks like maybe 2 torps and some bombs, but fortunately no flooding, so he was able to just extinguish the fire. He's not going to get any damage over time stacking up on him. It's a bit awkward having to turn away like that though, but he was already effectively in the turn, and because his AA is not that good, well, he did get 4 air kills, and I think the other Iron Duke might have gotten some air kills, but it wasn't enough to dissuade the enemy fighters, or the enemy strike planes rather. So not a great start. He's lost a chunk of health, but it's not fatal. He's not flooded or anything like that, and it wasn't both carriers stacking their strike against him, so that wasn't too bad. You know, that was a bit of an unpleasant start, but it could have been a lot worse. So this is a domination game, as you can see again, and it looks like most of each team has set sail towards sea. Well, certainly the bulk of the enemy team has. His own team is a bit more scattered. The best concentration of forces is still towards sea, but it's starting to look like the enemy team might have a slight superiority in numbers, because some of their own ships are a little more scattered around. They've got one of the Iron Dukes going up to A. Andy himself is trying to take out this Omaha and maybe cap B, which would actually put him in a good position to then give fire support over towards C, but would also maybe potentially, as an isolated battleship, make him once again an attractive target for carriers. So he at that point would maybe be relying on his own carriers for air cover. However, this Omaha is a very good target for him right now, and that's a lovely broadside, so in goes the AP, and a pair of citadels is enough to finish him off. I think that was the only penetrations, actually. It was literally just a pair of citadels. So no cap for the enemy so far. There is a destroyer to the north, though. The enemy destroyer, the T-22, might be a problem. It might take A. The T-22 isn't a great ship, but it is still a destroyer and considerably sneakier than an Iron Duke, and it can potentially stealth drop, so that Iron Duke towards A will have to be careful. To the south, well, nobody's actually managed to cap C, and it looks like that's attracting the attention of the enemy planes, which is good for Andy, because it means they might not necessarily decide to pick on him. But it also means that if that big blob of his own allied ships gets sunk, well, it's not going to be good. But they are still ahead at the moment on points and ships. So he's looking for targets, and hello, there's one of the carriers. That's rather nice. The T-22, by the way, you've probably noticed A is being capped, so him capping B is actually becoming quite important. They're also trying to cap C, but it depends, you know, how good the enemy team is at resetting. So that carrier makes for a very tasty target. Ordinarily, I mean, it depends on the circumstances. Ordinarily, I prefer to fire at the things that are actively firing back at me, but taking out a carrier at this stage in the game could give his own carriers a serious advantage. So this is actually a pretty good target to take down if he can. Talking of their own carriers, you might have noticed, despite that enemy destroyer, you know, we know exactly where he is. He's capped A. The Zuiho hasn't moved at all, and the Zuiho is reasonably close to that T-22, and if he doesn't get his bum out of there, he's going to be in trouble. And there's really nobody in place to really give any help, because that other Iron Duke that was in the north has decided to come and link up with Andy and fire onto the ships in the south. So they're even on ships at the moment, I believe. Yes, they are. But the enemy team in the south is slowly overpowering their own ships. They've lost, let's see, what was it? 2 battleships that were down there, I think. And it's the cruisers that are still trying to cap, but you can see one of them there, the Danae, is rather low health. And once they've taken that down, which won't take a lot of doing at this point, the Duguay-Trouin might then be the next focus, because they are rather close to quite a lot of enemy ships. Talking of rather close, though, this Congo is well within... this Congo is very close. This Congo is close enough for the secondaries to open up, in fact. I'm not quite sure why this Congo is pulling this manoeuvre. Yeah, it's put them in serious trouble. Unfortunately for Andy, it's also meant he's taken a whole bunch of damage, because even though he is angled here, the Congo was able to get at least one citadel. Well, I would say a citadel and some other penetrations. The armour of the Iron Duke isn't that great. I mean, the Orion, for its tier, when it's top tier, is okay. But once you're facing the bigger guns at tier 5 and upwards, yeah, the armour does not hold up that well at all. However, broadside like that, yeah, even without a citadel, that's enough to finish off that Congo, and that is that. So, what's left? Well, a bunch of enemy battleships, and there's one of the new ones, in fact, the October Revolution. I think I'll just stick to calling it that rather than mangling the Russian, because I will inevitably mangle the Russian. At least one of the carriers is also quite close, and in fact there he is. There's that Zuiho he was firing at earlier, and of course that makes for a very attractive target, even though there's also a low health Congo over there, which is, I think, what I would have been going for over the October Revolution. So, obviously, he's thinking, I'll take out the carrier, and then, well, surprise, surprise, there's the other carrier. This might be tasty. This might be very tasty indeed. So, one of the Zuihos is actually actively trying to get away. The other Zuiho appears to be stationary. Isn't trying to pull into cover behind the island, which they do have available. And so, if Andy gets the chance to take out this this low health Zuiho, there's a possibility he could get a double kill here, which I'm actually surprised there's not some kind of medal or award for, because getting double carriers isn't that common, and getting both carrier kills yourself as a player is therefore even less common. So there goes one Zuiho. The other one hasn't moved at all. Totally not paying attention to the minimap, apparently. Yeah, I mean, Andy himself has taken the attention of at least one of those ships. It might actually even be the October Revolution. But they have done a bit of damage, but it's not been hugely effective damage. And I think his angling has been sufficient at this range to repel some of those shells. And also, when you're travelling at this kind of angle, it can actually make aiming a bit more awkward for enemy players. Down to half health, just not reacting at all. I don't know if this player went AFK or who knows, but either way, it's just basically a matter of RNG as to how quickly Andy can kill this carrier, because they're just dead in the water and giving him a perfect broadside. And so all he needs is, you know, more penetrations or a citadel or two, and that's going to be all over. Talking of killing carriers, by the way, you know how I mentioned that Andy's own team Zuiho had basically not reacted to the T-22? Yeah, they're finally moving, but it's a little bit too late, because the T-22 is now in their face and killing them. And surprise, surprise, they are going to die. So this is why, if you're playing a carrier, it's very important to still keep an eye on the minimap. It will keep you alive, you know, using that ability to move yourself around and not just sitting stationary in the water, waiting for destroyers to creep up on you, generally speaking, is a good plan. And it's something that their own Zuiho didn't do. In the case of the enemy Zuiho, I don't know. Maybe they did go AFK. I really can't think of any other explanation as to why they would have just sat there and taken it. A destroyer sneaking up on you is one thing, but a battleship sneaking up on you, that's a whole other thing. So once again, this is going to be quite a tight close to this game. They are reasonably far ahead on points, having held a majority of the cap circles for quite a long time at this point. And though the enemy team does still have 3 ships left to their 4, well, they do still have a carrier left, and of these 2 remaining battleships, well, if Andy and this other Iron Duke can effectively what's the word I'm looking for, if they can coordinate their fire, combine their firepower, if they just pick on the same target, is what I'm trying to say. And I don't know why I'm struggling to say it, but you know, sometimes for some reason saying the easy things is very difficult when you're me. Yeah, if they can just focus down this Iron Duke, there you go, I think that's the words I wanted, then they've got a decent chance of taking down the October Revolution. But neither of them are particularly healthy, so if the enemy 2 battleships are doing the same thing, this other Iron Duke is probably also going to sink. Now this is the first time Andy's used HE in this game, and no fires yet, but if he can get some more fires going on this enemy Iron Duke, then it should knock off a fair bit of damage. I think that's just 1 fire going so far, but even without that, even with just the AP, because he's been top tier, he's still over 100,000 damage. He's actually going to get slightly more damage than Redman did. And this is why I was saying at the beginning, you know, we could speculate as to how well he would have done if he'd also just fired HE the entire time. We'll never know, but who knows? It could have been as good, it could have been better, because, of course, with HE, as I went on about at the start of the video, it's not just the HE shells themselves, it's that whopping great big fire chance. It's the fire chance that is completely disproportionate to the caliber of the shells, apart from at tier 6 and tier 8 with those 15-inch guns. So that's that. Iron Duke down. Their own did go down as well, but at this point, well, they've pretty much got it in the bag. As long as Andy doesn't completely die here. The Bogue, I think, might be visible now. I'm not sure. The other remaining ship, the Congo, is also pulling into range. So although it was just 2 versus 2 at that point, once again, we've got, you know, fire being focused on just a single target, so it's now 2 versus 1, which is what you want. And yeah, there we go, the October Revolution not actually firing at Andy, which is a good thing for him. Unfortunately, however, this island has just snuck up out of nowhere, as islands like to do, so that's a bit awkward because that limits how many turrets you can get on target. So as he's the lower health ship, I think the October Revolution has decided to concentrate on trying to kill Andy. I think he knows he's going to lose at this point, but if you're in that kind of situation, there you go, that Congo's very healthy. If you're in that kind of situation, then it's understandable that you would pick on the lowest health ship and try and get yourself a kill, because of course that's going to be worth a little bit more XP. So once more back onto the HE, because the October Revolution is angling a bit. Andy's had to very awkwardly back himself off the island. I think it was, he just wanted to keep the angle to fire more of his turrets, and now it's just costing him time because he's had to back off. He's going to have to go forwards again and re-angle his ship to be able to get more than his front 2 turrets on this remaining enemy ship. He does at least have a heal coming back though, his final heal, so I don't think there's really too much danger of him dying here, unless he was to do something completely stupid like swing completely broadside and give the October Revolution a chance to citadel him. So the Congo's going in close, which as we can see from the captain's skill has occupied the October Revolution's attention, so even though Andy is the lower health ship, this guy's now switched target to the ship that's in his face. I'm not entirely sure if the Congo has done this on purpose to help out Andy, or if they're just charging him because they can, because they're in a Congo. But either way, it's quite nice for Andy. It gives him a chance to straighten out a bit without worrying too much about getting hit a lot. Now, I'm not sure if he's only just decided to heal because he was keeping the lower health for reasons of making use of the Adrenaline Rush captain's skill, or else if he just hadn't realised he had it available, but it doesn't matter too much at this point. So that's his final salvo, I think. I don't think he gets another one. He's got a Kraken. He's not going to get this final kill, but he's got a Kraken, so honestly I don't think he can complain too much. 132,000 damage. I can get to 133 before it ends, but I don't think it does. It gets to just 133. Yeah, 5 kills. He had a Confederate and a high caliber there as well. I think Redman actually had 1 more medal than that as well, but Redman didn't get the Kraken. But yeah, despite being top tier, unlike Redman, he actually managed to get a far better score by about 500 XP. I'm not sure why. It might have been thanks to capping. Maybe he got some defense flags there that I missed. I don't think he did though. I don't know. Sometimes it's a bit difficult trying to determine why the XP is that it is, even though Redman was, you know, in a tier 4 shooting at some tier 5s. Maybe he did more damage against same and lower tier ships. I don't know. But either way, that was a pretty nice result, and it shows that, you know, the AP is workable, but the first game shows that, well, you can just not think about it. You can just go for the HE and fire HE all day long, and you'll equally be fine, if not better. And as I said, that's a bit of a problem. That's a bit of a design flaw. And Wargaming are aware, and they are looking at it. The question is, which we don't know, what are they going to do about it, and how long is it going to take them to implement a fix. So those are the two big question marks at the moment with British battleships. I don't think wargaming is likely to just leave things as they are. Some change is going to happen. It's just we don't know what change and if it will be for the better. We can keep our fingers crossed though. So hopefully you enjoyed this Para Replays, and if you did, you can hit the like button, you can leave any comments below, you can sub to my channel if you haven't already, and as always, stay tuned for more.